I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. If you'd like to join us live, you'll find the schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com. Tonight, my guest is Lawrence Leyderman. Lawrence is a landscape and overlanding photographer, a photography workshop instructor, and he's consistently creating beautiful images and content for his fine art portfolio. You can connect with Lawrence through his website at lawrencelederman.com. And if you're on Instagram, you can find him at overlanding photography. Tonight, Lawrence will pick up where he left off in session 211. Conquer the Outdoors, your guide to landscape photography gear, techniques, and adventure prep. Lawrence, welcome back to the Happiness Hour.
Thank you for having me, Linda. Hey, everybody.
Well, where did we leave off? I can't remember. I meant to go back. I think you're going to talk about post-processing, right?
Well, no, not even yet. We just got through gear.
Oh my God. All right.
And now today I'm gonna do just advanced landscape photography
Okay.
techniques. I'm gonna be touching on 6 different techniques that I employ as I shoot, and just going into each one of them a little bit and answering any questions anybody has about them, pretty much. And then we might have to have a part 3 eventually about planning
Okay.
and all that. But today's going to be basically about the techniques.
I'm not sad about that at all. It's always fun to have you and y'all, before you guys come in the room, I get a few minutes to, hang out with Lawrence and get all the good gossip. And tonight he got a little bit of a hurricane preparedness lecture from me, but he recently moved from, where did you start? New York? Because that was home base, down to Florida. So new landscapes, new adventures, just a little bit less elevation. So, all right, with that, let me hand it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So, advanced landscape photography techniques. I'll be talking today about basically HDR photography, panoramic photography, long exposures, a little bit of astro, a little bit of time lapse, but not time lapse, interval shooting more. So yeah, so this is a picture from I think maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago. The Beaver Moon, full moon rising. I basically only shoot my full moons over piers or lighthouses, so hence the pier. Okay, so here's my contact information, my email below, my Instagram, my websites, and me and the egg that I laid. No, that was in Alabama Hills. I just thought it was a pretty funny picture, me and my dinosaur egg. So last month I taught 2 workshops in Colorado at the end of September and the first week of October during the fall. And as soon as it was over, I headed out to Utah. And I'm sure all of you have been here or at least seen this spot in Forrest Gump. Can you imagine how many pissed off photographers were over there when I was doing this? But I was really quick. But anyway, so I headed out to Utah for a little bit because of the Northern Lights and all that was happening. But these are some photos from that trip. Um, I was given a Jeep to do some content for, so that's why I actually had the Jeep in the middle of the road. But yeah, it was pretty cool. I got to shoot Northern Lights and a meteor in the same week, right? And that's pretty cool. I didn't expect to be able to do that. This is where I went for the aurora. I haven't really started my presentation yet, but I just wanted to show you this because I always go to the same place because it's so desolate. Nobody ever goes here. It's hard to find. It's way off road and it looks like Mars. So anytime something really weird's happening, I try to go out to this landscape. And this isn't that one that most people go right off the road. This one's really off road. I spent 4 days here once without a single person passing by. But anyway, and this is where I slept. It was really, really nice out. So, and there you can see a little bit of aurora. I'm actually sleeping though. This is not just a pretend photo. This is one of the images from my time lapse. I set up a time lapse usually when I go to sleep, when I'm outside, and this was one of the shots from it. So jumping into the present, that was just what I did in the last month. It was kind of fun, but today I'll be chatting a little bit about long exposures, HDR photography, which is exposure bracketing, panoramic photography, but not cropping, actual multi-photo panoramas. Then HDR panoramas, so kind of blending the two, a little bit of focus stacking, a little bit of night photography. Um, and it's really cool that we have all of these different things that we can do just to get extra creative, right? You don't have to do any of this stuff, but it's nice that we can get creative as photographers with all these different advanced techniques. So I'm going to begin with chatting about long exposures and why I love long exposures. And it's probably something I do every single day of my life with ND filters and whatnot, right? So what a long exposure is basically any type of picture that's longer than, you know, everyone can, I guess to me, a long exposure is anything that has drag in it that can create motion, right? It can be 1 second, it can be half a second, a minute, an hour, whatever it is that's actually showing you time as an aspect of the photo. And this photo that's in this scene, I think is actually 4 minutes long during the day. And I'm pretty sure I put a 15 stop filter on this photo. And again, long exposure photos can smooth out water. They can create car trails. They create motion. They can make things dreamy. The photo that you see on the left is a 2 minute photo, while the image on the right is a 2 second photo. And they're both long exposures. It's just once you practice this technique, you start to understand what you're going to get. And, if I did a 2 minute exposure on that ocean, the scene on the right, it would just be like mushy, just kind of a blah. I mean, it could look cool, but it won't have any kind of motion to the water. It'll just be like ice. And I tend to not like that. I tend to like things that are on both ends of the spectrum, like very long or on the shorter end. Sometimes in the middle, like a 5 second, 10 second might kind of just make it a little look like it's out of focus. But anyway, so the image on the left is a 250 millimeter focal length. That's why it's compressed like that. And that shots that photograph, that location's been shot a lot. It's actually on the border of Pennsylvania and New York. I don't give up locations unless they're already really known and popular already. But yeah, that's called Hawk's Nest on the left. Um, More long exposures, right? You can do long exposures during the daytime, as you just saw. You can do them at night. Um, the photo on the right here, where you see the lights coming out of the front of the car, that was actually an accident. I was just really tired and I just wanted to go home. And so I just went to the car during a long exposure and got the car and drove up and grabbed my camera to leave. And that's what happened. I didn't actually mean for that one on the right. But the one on the left is a new technique I've been playing around with. And that photo you're looking at on the left is a 4 minute exposure where the car didn't drive for the first 2 minutes of it. So I started the 4 minute exposure, walked to the car, got in, and by the way, I have everything timed, right? So I timed the exposure, I set the exposure on my watch, and I'll sit in the car and be like, okay, 2 minutes is up, now drive. And so some of the car got burned into the shot while the rest didn't. And it's a little bit transparent. But I played around. I did 3 minutes sitting in the car, 1 minute driving, 1 minute sitting in the car, 3 minutes driving. So it's a game. And if you look at the sky in that shot on the left, you can see like little baby star trails. So you can see it's 4 minutes of star trail. Anyway, long exposures are fun. Here's another long exposure on the left here, where I put on an ND filter and created this super dramatic, dreamy image because the sunlight was hitting the pier while there were like really dark storm clouds behind it. So I took advantage of that. And when you're doing long exposures, a lot of it, if it's not dark out and it's still bright out, you probably have to put ND filters on your lens, 3 stop, 6 stop, 10 stop, depending on the creative measure that you want to accomplish, right? A lot of times you have to focus and lock your focus in before you put in the filter because sometimes you can't even see what is in front of you once you have a dark piece of glass on your lens. Um, and let's move on. Here's two more long exposures of the same scene in New York City in Central Park, right? The one on the left is 15 seconds. The one on the right is 120 seconds. Leaves from the trees had fallen into the lake. And I'm now just dragging leaves. There was no wind, right? These are just slow moving leaves. But look at what you can do. It's like a painting. And I put these side by side just so you can see the level of difference that 2 minutes versus 15 seconds makes. And again, the difference between that is just a different filter, right? I probably use this a 6 stop or a 10 stop on the left, and then maybe a 15 stop on the right. 4 minute card trail that you see on the left. This was in uh, by Las Vegas. I forget the name of this park. I got forget it, but yeah, that's a 4 minute exposure. You can see the card trail. I actually drove it. When you have very long exposure, you can actually make your own card trails if you're in a place where you feel safe that you can get to the car easily from the camera. So this is me doing everything, working the camera, working the card trail, all of it. This is an 8 minute long exposure, just icing the water, isolating that house on sticks, creating this super dreamy effect. Another really cool thing long exposures do are they make things disappear, right? So if you look at on the left, that's a cell phone photo of the camera shooting the bridge. Look at all those cars, right? And then, 2 minute exposure and all you see are the porta potties on the bridge. No cars, right? So they're pretty magical. Just more cool stuff, right? Look at that. You can use lasers and you could do boat trails and star trails and firework trails. And these are all long exposures, right? The boats in the top right are 2 minutes. The laser to the left of that, which is in the Oregon coast, it was about a 1 minute exposure. That's a really challenging thing I did that night. All those little spots that you see in that photo with the green, that was moisture in the air just being picked up by the laser. The green lights on the rock were the laser bouncing off of the water on the ground. I never even put that light on that rock. Anyway, long exposures are fun. Moving on. Oh man, we have more examples, okay? Um, so more card trails, lightning. I use long exposures when I shoot lightning. I do like probably 15 second exposures, 10-second exposures, put my camera on interval mode. I know a lot of people use lightning triggers, but I don't. I just put on interval mode with long exposures and relax, and I get everything anyway, like that. Okay, we're moving on now to a next technique of mine, which I use a lot, which is exposure bracketing. Any questions about these long exposures or anything?
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Okay, cool. So HDR photography. I shoot, well, what is HDR photography? HDR photography is something that you use when you have a very challenging lighting situation where the sun can be directly in your frame and you're pointing into the sun, where there's shadows that are completely dark, and then you can't capture the whole range of light in one scene. Your histogram sort of looks like a horseshoe where you have a bunch of the histogram up against the left wall, and then you have a bunch of the histogram up against the right wall. That's like an indicator that you probably need to exposure bracket. So what I do is I take multiple photos and it's changing the shutter speed while keeping the ISO and the aperture consistent. And it's allowing me to capture different ranges of that light. And then I blend them together, which now is pretty easy with Photoshop or Lightroom, and you can manually do it too. Um, so as you can see here, this scene was one that I needed to shoot in 3 shots to capture the light in the dark areas and the bright areas. And, those are the 3 shots on the left, and that's the final image on the right that you see here. Here's the most extreme example you can get, like ever. And that's being inside of a cave, shooting into a sunrise. I don't think you can get more extreme than that, right? Like, I'm pretty positive. So in the cave, it's completely pitch black. And then if I'm shooting out into the opening, I mean, I'm not getting anything but that blackness of the cave if I'm trying to expose for the outside of the sun, right? So here I had to use more than 3 shots. I had to use 5 shots to get everything. Um, and there's the final result on the bottom right. Again, the sun's right in my frame, so I had to use exposure bracketing to be able to capture this scene. When you are doing that, you should always be on a tripod. And I personally like to have, when you're doing exposure bracketing, you have a base image and then you're shooting plus and minus to that. So my base image is generally -1 on the exposure compensation scale. And generally, I almost nail every single scene by shooting +2 and -2. So what that means is if my base image is a -1 in exposure compensation, then I'm shooting a -3 and a +1. So my range of light is going from -3 to +1. That's generally what I shoot, and I practically am able to capture almost every single scene. That cave, I had to go from -5 to +3. So it was 5 shots with 2 stops of light over and under. Here, I'm just showing you how you can blend them. You select the 3 images in Lightroom, which you can see on the left image. I have them selected. You right click on any of those images and you have that menu pop up. One of the menu items is photo merge. When you hover over photo merge, HDR panorama pop up. Click on HDR and magic happens and you get that result on the right. And you've just added a whole lot of dynamic range to the scene that you now can use in your editing. And being on the coast, I shoot water a lot. And one of the things about HDR photography is it's much easier to do when things are not moving. So with the ocean, it's a challenge. A lot of times I have to manually blend it and I can't use Lightroom's method. But that's the final result. And there was no way, there's no way you can capture this with one frame. I don't care what kind of camera you have, what lens, what camera, it's just not possible. Our human eye sees a lot better than cameras, basically. And just kind of to quantify it, I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate, but the human eye sees about 23 to 25 stops of light, while our cameras are between 13 and 15, something like that. Here's another scene. Oh, this is funny. So this is I'm shooting I'm shooting an HDR bracket of another camera shooting, I guess. But as you can see here, it was necessary for this scene as well. And again, this is my choice, right? To shoot it this way. You do not have to capture all of the details in a scene. It's not a rule or anything, but it's just something I like to do. I like to show everything in the shadows, everything in the highlights, and then just slightly pull it back, right? So here's the final result of that image. And again, impossible to do without doing it this way. And this was a 5-shot bracket. All of the photos you see in front of you were shot in that way. Okay, moving on to panoramic photography. I used to shoot panoramic images. Like I got really addicted to shooting panoramic photography. Um, Everything I was doing was just like my mind was in a panoramic state at one point. It took me a while to get out of it. It's pretty addicting. But I really like large scenes. And one of the reasons that I got into shooting panoramic photography is because I didn't like the limitations of the megapixels of my cameras, actually. And I wanted to print bigger and in higher megapixels. And so that's what had me start doing this. And I also really like the way things get compressed when you're shooting wide angle scenes with one lens, when you're using a wide angle lens, the mountains in the distance become really tiny. So shooting panoramic photography and stitching it together allows me to keep things in the distance not looking tiny and kind of giving good balance to the photo the way your human eye sees it almost. So instead of getting this scene with a 16 millimeter lens, I shot it with a 70 millimeter lens and I was able to, put it together like this. Um, well, I'm going to go back to this slide in a moment, but this is basically, wait, let me actually go. So a panoramic image basically looks like this. I'm shooting piece by piece and I'm overlapping by, I like to overlap a lot. So I overlap about 50% usually. This particular photo, this is 2 rows. This is a 2-row panoramic image. And just like in the last image that I showed you in HDR, the way you process it is in Lightroom. And you're able to select all the images, right click on them. That that menu pops up. You go to photo merge, just slide over to panorama, and then Lightroom does its magic. And look at that. It put 2 rows together on its own. And then you get to choose which, if you like spherical, cylindrical, perspective, and then it has a bunch of other options, but it's that easy. And then sliders left and right and a little bit of adjustments, and this is what I got. But if you notice, look at the size of the image. It's 289 megapixels. And I shot this on the Fuji, and it really increased the size of my image. So it allowed me to really print it pretty big. Okay, so what do you need to shoot panoramic photography? And that's my setup. And at the bottom of that setup is obviously the tripod, but above the tripod is a leveling base. That's probably the most important tool when you're shooting panoramic photography so that you can get level really fast. A nice solid ball head right above that. And then the nodal slide is what I have on the top of the ball head. What that does is it puts the parallax point in the center and not the sensor. So it allows the overlap to be really perfect. And it stitches really well together like that. But this is my setup. This is a pretty cool pano. I shot that with a telephoto lens. So, I mean, this was, I think, yeah, this is a 250 millimeter vertical pano. So I was really able to, get a lot of extra detail in this image. Okay. Another example. of a really cool pano. So you get when I'm doing, I do a lot of telephoto panoramic imagery, and check this out. It's so wild the way I was able to compress this. It's just very unusual. The way the river comes in from the left, the way that that road comes in on the right, and the only way to do this is a panoramic style with a telephoto lens for this particular scene, I guess. Um, and then look at the megapixels. This is almost 500 megapixels. So I can probably print this, I don't know, 15 feet long. Pretty crazy. At like 300 DPI. No, don't quote me on that, but more panoramic photography that I really love. The image on the bottom left is actually a drone pano. If you guys fly drones, if you have the DJI Mavic, they have an automatic 3-row 21 image pano option. So with one click, it does it all by itself. Check this out. This is where I was, by the way, just now in Utah. This is that place I told you nobody ever goes. And this is the drone shooting a 3-row panoramic image on its own with one click. And so it's 7 images per row right here. Okay. So now to combine the last two things into one, um, high dynamic range bracketed photography with panoramic photography, right? So now we're talking about high dynamic range situations where you want to capture a major scene. So same thing as before. You use the leveling base, the nodal slide. You make sure that you have everything set up the way you want it, and you just go from left to right. And now you're just shooting in a bracketed way instead of a single image way. And Lightroom just magically does the editing and processing the same way. But when you're doing panoramic photography, make sure that you check your scene out from left to right before you start shooting. Make sure that the exposure works everywhere, because as you're shooting from left to right, and like, let's say the sun is on the right, you'll notice that everything changes. So make sure that you're able to nail where the sun is as well as where it's not, and before you begin. No polarizers on panoramic photography, okay? Man, I made that mistake way too many times. You get that vignetting on the sides, right? You get that little darkness on the sides, and they just do not stitch. So never use a polarizer when you're doing any type of panoramic photography. Okay. This was one of the coolest mornings ever out in Utah a couple of years ago. And I really wanted to capture that entire scene. So for me to capture this ridiculous scene here in Mars, I had to shoot it in this way. So here you can see every single image of the HDR pano. And once you have those images in Lightroom, same thing as before, select all of them. And if you see here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 7 pieces of this bracket here, right? So it's 21 images. I selected all of them, right click, photo merge, HDR panorama, and that's what happens, right? It merges everything together, gives you the same options as before, spherical, cylindrical, perspective. You choose what you like. You can either pull those edges out or crop it, and that's it. You click merge and Lightroom does its magic. And then this is what I got. Here's another example. New York City, HDR, panoramic, huge photo, all the way from the southern tip to the northern tip. Again, you cannot shoot this any other way. It can only be done with an HDR pano if you want all the details. Again, you don't have to shoot it this way if you want to just expose for the highlights or the shadows. The image here on the right, I shot like 2 days ago, and the reason I put that in here is because this is a vertical pano. I shot this vertically. I shot the sky, and then I shot the middle, and then I shot the bottom. So this is 3 rows, but from top to bottom, not from left to right. Um, I'm talking about the image on the right with those green mossy rocks. And then on the left, that's just another HDR panoramic image. Moving on to focus stacking, which is the fourth technique we're talking about today. So we went over long exposures, HDR panels, now focus stacking. So I got the Fuji GFX 100 2 years ago, and that camera had focus stacking built into it. What that means is the camera can automatically take images from the nearest point I tell it to till infinity, until it captures the whole scene, and it calculates your f-stop, your focal length, and it also checks out the scene, and it knows how many images it needs to take on its own to capture everything, right? So this particular image you're looking at on the right, I shot with the telephoto lens, or like a mid telephoto, 110 millimeter lens. And that photo took 20, I'm not sure if it was 20 images or 40 images. I forget now, but it took that many images to get all of those focus lines. Because, I mean, look at how close to me that nearest point is. But again, this is another image that you cannot shoot any other way. And this is why these techniques are so important to what I do. Because everybody has a cell phone these days, and I want to do things differently. I want to make things look different. I want people to be like, whoa, how did you even do that? And I love that image on the right. So you can do focus stacking manually, right? You can focus on one point, take a picture, focus on another point, take a picture, focus on another point, take a picture. And that works. I do it sometimes on different scenes. This particular one, man, that would be impossible to focus 40 times. Let's move on. Check this out. Here's another focus stacked image in Death Valley. I'm sure that you guys have all been here to this exact place. But look at the way I was able to shoot this scene differently. And look at how many focus points were shot to get ultimate focus. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 27 plus 6. So we have 33 images here. It took 33 images for this scene at f11. And you know what? I was talking to my friend the other day, and we were talking about focus stacking, and he goes, why don't you just do it the old school way? I'm like, what's the old school way? He goes, shoot it at f22. And I told him that would never work. Because when you're using a telephoto lens, I don't care if you're at f100, which whatever, it doesn't really exist, but you can get to like f45 on some lenses. You still could not get everything in focus. And plus it would be blurry because of diffraction. So I'm able to choose my sharpest focus, my sharpest f-stop on my lens and still get full focus. So that's another huge benefit. You can shoot it at your sharpest focal point. No wind was blowing, so when you're focus stacking, have to things have to be constant, no wind, no movement. So a lot of the stuff I'm sharing with you guys today, I can't really do out here, by the way, in Florida, because I shoot seascapes all the time. So like focus stacking the ocean, not possible. HDR photography on the ocean, pretty challenging. Panoramic photography of the ocean, almost impossible. So like, yeah, I can't use a lot of this stuff out here, so it's a challenge. Check this out, guys. I focus stack this. You know how far the Empire State Building is from the Freedom Tower? And again, I'm trying to create looks that other people don't have, and I'm trying to make things look different. And I think this was 250 millimeters, and I compressed these two buildings, and they're as sharp as you can get. Just a couple more focus stacking examples. Those leaves are really close to me, and I wanted those water droplets on them because there was moisture, it just rained. So only by focus stacking was I able to accomplish getting the little droplets of the water on those leaves. Those are grape leaves, I believe they're called, right? And then all the way through to the lighthouse, which is about a mile away from me. You can even read the words on that sign. Um, okay, I shot this a week ago, right? Um, Not even. I shot this 3 days ago. And this was a focus stacked image. And I told you guys just now it's almost impossible to shoot focus stacked images on the water, right? On the ocean. So this was a mess, and I had to like really clean it up. I use a program called Helicon. And Helicon is a program dedicated for focus stacking. You can focus stack in Photoshop too, but Helicon does a much better job. And Helicon allowed me to go back into the image and adjust where it wasn't able to do a perfect blend. But guys, look at this. Look how much cool stuff is going on, right? There's moss on the rocks. There's the water that's kind of like the long, by the way, it's long exposure too, right? So I'm stacking semi-long exposures. Um, Look at the light rays in the back. Look at the wave motion. I wanted all of it. I wasn't going to be happy with just the sun rays, just the motion in the ocean, just the green moss. No, no way. I needed it all. I needed from the front to the back. Only way this was happening was focus stacking. And this was 7 images. So, so here you can see another example, right? Of I actually so here's another example of focus stacking where it's mandatory. Like on the left, you can see the first shot when I focused on that front pole of the pier, nothing else is in focus. And then if you look on the right, when I focus to the back, the front is not in focus. Um, I actually forgot to add the photo to the presentation that was the complete image. But I think you guys really are starting to get the point of why focus stacking is important, and why it's a creative measure that I do employ a lot of times. Okay. Night photography, right? That's the next thing I'm going to chat about a little bit. Astrophotography, capturing the night sky. Um, Something that I love and it's very addicting. Um, just getting out there and just shooting at night. So here are just some of the images that I take. And night photography basically is long exposure photography, right? Because you have to have your camera open for a certain period of time to get good light, to get all the shadows to be exposed. Most of the time, you're actually blending images. You're blending the sky with the foreground. But astrophotography and night photography is one of my favorite things to do here. And this is a photo that was a long exposure for the foreground. This is a panoramic long exposure astro shot, right? So this is 2 rows of photography. This is a 2-row panel of the sky and the foreground out in Utah. If any of you guys are wondering where this is, it's called Goosenecks, right by Mexican Hat. Super cool place. You can actually reserve a camping spot there. I think there's like 16 spots. All of them are over the edge. So like you are looking at this scene when you're camping. Um, just really fun, like night photography. This is the reason why this is in my techniques, I guess, is just because it's just another thing that we can do as photographers that adds enjoyment and fun and something that's different, right? You want to usually have a wide angle lens. You want to have a very open aperture. You want something that's like f2, f2.8, 1.4, 1.8. Those are the type of lenses that you want for this type of photography. Um, the moon, the pier, long exposure. I know it says astrophotography, but I guess I'm really just talking about night photography because I enjoy all types of night photography, which would be astro, which would be moon, car trails, urban. Next week I'll be shooting in Miami, Art Deco night photography. This is I wanted to show you guys this because it's a program I use called Starry Landscape Stacker to really clean up my stars. And if you don't have a star tracker, you can actually shoot the sky at 12,800 ISO and use this program to clean up all the noise. Let me explain real quick. Noise is not consistent. Noise is electronically manufactured by the camera sensor, and noise is inconsistent from photo to photo, right? While stars are consistent, they're not manufactured by your camera sensor. They're there. So you can actually shoot at 12,800 and have a pretty fast shutter speed so that you don't drag the stars and you have pinpoint sharp stars. And then if you put those images into this program, after taking about 20 of them, the program is able to differentiate the noise from the stars. And then it gives you back a clean image, which is pretty crazy. So I used that program for almost all for the Milky Way that's in the center here, for the Milky Way that's on the bottom here. It allows you to have something that's printable. The next thing I'm going to talk about and the last thing I'm going to talk about is just interval photography. And interval photography allows you to do a lot of really cool things. And that's basically telling your camera to shoot over and over and over, back to back, right? So interval photography allows me to shoot a lot of star trails, allows me to capture lightning, it allows me to blend things. And here are some of the images that were all shot using interval photography, right? So these star trails, for example, were a blend of long exposure interval photography. So what I did here was I took either 4 or 8 minute photos, 8 of them, to create that image on the left. And I focus stacked. So this image on the left uses a bunch of the techniques we talked about today. If you look on the right side of the screen and on the top, I focus stacked that cactus, which is called a barrel cactus, about an hour earlier than I shot the stars. I set up my camera. I left my camera there. I focus stacked the foreground. I waited 1 hour until it became dark. And then I shot 8 interval images of the stars. So I'm using these techniques together to create images like the one you see on the left, right? So photography is fun, and we have all these amazing tools. Yes, some of them are challenging to figure out, but once you start playing with them, you can do a lot of really cool things. That's about it. I kept it pretty short today. So
Short and sweet is fine.
yeah,
Okay, so that's his contact information. So let me get you to take down your screen. I've got 2 questions for you, just for some clarification here.
stuff.
So Susan's question is, if we don't have a camera like yours, we have to do this manually.
What are we talking about?
I think she was talking about your focus stacking
Focus stacking?
and your HDR.
So almost every single camera at this point does have bracketing.
Hmm.
Um, 10 years ago, they already had them. Even focus stacking, a lot of cameras already had in them. Uh, the automatic focus stack. I'm talking about automatic. All these things you can do manually.
Hmm.
They're easier to do in an automatic way, specifically focus stacking. Now, going back to HDR photography, I actually sometimes prefer manual HDR exposure bracketing because then you really can see what you're capturing and you can watch the histogram as you do it. So when you're manually doing exposure bracketing, just look at your histogram, look at the picture in your camera, but more the histogram. Make sure that everything is off the right wall when you're shooting the shadows. Make sure everything's off the left wall when you're shooting the highlights, right? Vice versa, actually. I mean, the reverse of what I just said. But um, when it comes to focus stacking and doing it manually, it's very, very hard if you're shooting with a telephoto lens. Okay. If you're using a wide angle lens and you're like at f8 or f11, you don't have too many focus points that you need. So you may need two or three or four or five. You can gauge it by looking at your images, right? And by practicing, you can figure it out over time. But I wouldn't try it if you were using anything over like 70 millimeters. I just wouldn't do it automatically just because it may become too many focus points. Now, to build on that, if the thing you're focusing on is pretty close to you, creating a really shallow depth of field, and you're using anything over 50 millimeters, just don't do it automatic. Don't try to do it manually because you're just not going to do it. You're going to have gaps of focus. You won't be able to, right? You'll have focus here, here, here. You'll miss a spot, and then all of a sudden, when you're trying to put it together, you'll have like a line of blur, um, which could be interesting if that's what you want, right? You could actually blur the middle of an image and have the foreground sharp and the background sharp. I don't know why you would want that, but you can. So just to answer your question, everything can be done manually. If you're doing it focus stacking, it's pretty easy. If you're at 16 millimeter to 24 millimeter and you're at f8, you can definitely do it manually. You probably only need like 3 to 4 points. Um, yeah.
Okay. Carolyn's question is focus stacking, is it just merged together in Lightroom as an HDR?
You cannot use Lightroom to blend focus stack images. Lightroom only automatically blends HDR panoramic and HDR panoramic. Uh, Photoshop does have automatic focus stacking in it, and it's in the align section. It's in the first you have to click on align images, and then it's going to align everything, just overlap it, make sure that everything is sharp. But you don't have to do that if you're on tripod. Um, and then there's something called auto stack in Photoshop. And again, Photoshop does a pretty good job, but I personally like the program called Helicon Focus. And whenever you see all those pictures of like the bugs and all those really tiny things that took 100 photos that were shot macro, all those guys are using Helicon Focus. Flowers. Yeah, it's the go-to program.
Okay. Valerie, I see your question, but I think something's missing. So can you look at that again? So John's got a question. Any tips for overcoming big jumps in focus distance, i.e., for example, a row of bushes a few feet out to a long distance background?
In terms of focus stacking,
Um, I think maybe yes. Yes.
that is one of the biggest challenges, what he just said, when there's nothing in between, because that foreground blurs into the road or whatever's behind it. And then if you focus on the road, it blurs into the foreground. So the situation that John just mentioned is one of the biggest challenges when you are focus stacking, when there isn't anything in the middle, right? So in those situations, a lot of times you have to manually go and clean it up. So when I told that photo of the wave that I was just showing you, because there was a good different distance between the rock and that wave, I did have to fix it a bunch. And the only time I ever experienced that is if there is a huge gap in between. That was a really good question.
Okay. All right, Valerie's come back with her question. For your landscapes and focus stacking, what focus differential do you prefer?
What focus differential do I prefer? So I'm not sure I understand the question, but I was going to add one thing. I definitely would like to. Oh, by the way, sorry. Let me
Yeah.
answer her first. I do like to shoot my focus stacks somewhere at a higher aperture, somewhere between f8 and f11, just because it takes less photos and there's less of that blur, which John was just talking about, right? So when you're at a lower aperture, there's it blurs the stuff in the background more. So it's easier to blend when you're at higher apertures because it has less of that blur that overlaps. But I don't understand that question about the.
Okay, she's come back and defined what she's
Okay.
asking. She's saying that the differential distance, okay, it's the distance between the focus points. So for your landscapes and your focus stacking, what's your
Okay.
distance?
I focus on the closest point every single time. That's it. And I let the camera do the work because you can always later do whatever you want. I had a job shooting diamonds for a very huge diamond company. Like yellow canaries, like $20 million stones, crazy stuff. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because what I did was the following. These are little rings. There's a stone and a ring. And I focus stacked from the front of it. Actually, I started way before the diamond on the cloth, and I shot the focus stack all the way to the back of the ring, right? But then later, I decided I only want to blend the diamond and leave everything else blurry. So I chose the frames from the front of the diamond to the back of the diamond that were sharp and left the ring blurry and the foreground blurry. So I basically just choose my closest point every single time, getting all the focus points from the front to the back. And I rarely don't use that whole thing, but in that one circumstance, I did.
Okay. Let's see. Let me just look really quick. I think I got all the questions. So, yeah, thank you for bringing all your beautiful pictures. I mean, one after another, Lawrence. It's just, it's beautiful. And you're going to see that in the comments. Okay, so I don't know if you're going to remember this, but when you were talking about your panoramic photos, I want to remind you and let everybody know back in session number 99, you kind of did a surprise extra for us. Do you remember that? Yeah. So if you're interested in panorama, uh, how to shoot them, the gear he uses, he buried that in session number 99. So thank you for doing that.
That was
All,
during my that was my addiction phase. Remember I told you
yes, I know.
I like had this one topic and I'm like, no, I'm gonna divert to panoramic stuff.
I know you kind of like try it's like, okay, we're gonna just hit a general, thing, general topic, and then out of nowhere, you spent like, I don't know, 20 minutes on just doing panoramas. It was like, okay. Yeah, we could have done a whole session on that actually, just because
Okay.
the technical stuff. But thank you again for coming and being such a good friend to this show and taking my ribbing at, nudging you and giving you a hard time. So I appreciate that. And please don't block me. Don't block me.
Oh,
Don't block
never.
me ever. All right. Next week, we're taking a break for the Thanksgiving holiday, but we'll be back on December 4th with Sally Lombard and her presentation, Sports Photography 101. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful and I hope that we see you again soon.